Welcome back to Bookkast, where we give you the bestsellers in minutes. And I'm Paul.
Hi, I'm Sarah.
And today we're taking a deep dive into Abundance, a New York Times bestseller by Ezra Klein and Thompson.
This book has a really compelling vision. Despite all the challenges that we're facing right now, a future full of abundance in things like energy, housing, technology, it's not a pipe dream.
Yeah.
They say it's actually within our grasp.
Like genuinely possible.
Yeah, so think of this as like a rapid download
Okay.
of all the core arguments and the surprising insights of this really important book.
Absolutely. And the book drops you right into this future scenario right away.
Yeah.
And asks you to imagine a world
Okay.
powered by clean and really cheap energy from solar, wind, nuclear, geothermal.
Wow.
And they contrast this with our, reliance on fossil fuels,
Yeah.
which they kind of vividly describe as mining rocks and burning them.
Yeah, it really makes you rethink how we get our energy, right?
Almost immediately.
Yeah, and they don't stop there.
No.
They take this idea of abundance even further to how we think about producing food.
Oh, okay.
So imagine vertical farms, giving us all this fresh local produce year-round.
Okay.
And we wouldn't need so much land for traditional agriculture.
Right.
And then there's cultivated meat, grown in labs, potentially freeing up huge amounts of land that we could use for like rewilding and stuff.
Oh, wow.
It's a very transformative picture they paint.
It is. It's very different. It's a real shift in thinking.
Absolutely. And what really struck me, Paul, is that this big shift in our physical world,
Yeah.
it's happening at the same time as this digital revolution that we're all living through.
Right.
And they suggest that we're right on the edge of moving beyond what they call these braided crises, things like housing, financial instability, pandemics, climate change, political gridlock.
Right. Those feel very 21st century.
Exactly.
Like this is our world right now.
Yeah, and it's a powerful idea, and the book doesn't shy away from this central frustration. For years, especially in the U.S., it felt like we knew what the solutions were to all this scarcity,
Okay.
whether it was building more affordable housing or investing in clean energy, but things just moved so slowly.
Yeah, progress has been so slow.
The authors dig into why those blockages existed, and it's a fascinating part of the book.
Absolutely. And that leads us right to what they call the supply problem.
Okay.
They highlight this shift in economic and political thinking towards the supply side.
Okay.
The realization that simply trying to manage demand isn't enough if the supply of the things we need isn't there to meet those needs.
So it's not just about wanting things, it's about making sure they exist in the first place.
Precisely.
Okay.
And they challenge this traditional view of the economy, as a fixed pie.
Right. Like you get a bigger slice.
Yeah, just slicing up the same pie into smaller pieces.
Exactly.
But they say no true economic growth comes from innovation,
Okay.
from creating entirely new, bigger pies, not just getting a bigger slice.
Okay, so creating more for everyone, not just fighting over the same amount.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And at the core of this pie making, according to Klein and Thompson, is technology.
Oh, interesting.
They see it as this crucial tool for building a more just world, a more sustainable future. But they're also careful to say that technology by itself isn't enough.
Okay.
It needs to be embedded in, good policies,
Okay.
effective institutions so that it actually helps people.
It's not just like tech for tech's sake.
Exactly.
It has to actually improve things.
Precisely.
Okay.
And one of the most powerful illustrations of this idea is the housing crisis.
The housing crisis. Oh, wow.
And they draw this insightful contrast between America's historical reliance on this vast Western expanse, this idea of like a manifest destiny and the frontier as a source of opportunity, and our current reality where the most valuable land for innovation and economic activity is in our cities.
Right, so the opportunity has shifted.
Exactly.
Okay.
And they really emphasize, the cost of housing in these major urban centers.
Manhattan, San Francisco, LA.
Yeah, Seattle, Boston.
Those places are so expensive.
They've become these places where the cost of living makes it nearly impossible
To even live there.
Yeah, regardless of your skills.
Yeah.
Or your contributions,
It doesn't even matter.
Like New York City has almost flipped from a place you went to make your fortune to a place where you need a fortune.
Just to live there.
Just to live there.
Wow.
And this has all these wider consequences, right?
Yeah, like what?
The book talks about the rise of this ideas and services economy.
Okay.
And how innovation tends to cluster in these dense urban environments.
Right.
Even though, like, communication and transportation have improved.
You think that would spread things out more?
You'd think it would make it less important to be in the same physical space.
Yeah.
And this is where they introduce this really important idea called the Great Divergence.
The Great Divergence, okay.
So while innovation is happening in these high-cost cities, the cost of housing is actually making it harder for people to live there and participate in that.
So they can't benefit from the innovation they're helping to create.
Exactly.
That doesn't seem very fair.
No, it's a real problem, and it has this cascading effect.
Okay.
You know, the book explores the impact on local service sector jobs.
Like teachers and nurses and retail workers.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Where the high cost of living doesn't necessarily lead to higher wages.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Because their productivity gains aren't as big.
Right, as in tech or finance or whatever.
Right, so they're stuck in this really difficult situation.
That's a really important point.
And perhaps most troublingly,
Okay.
they connect these really high housing costs to the decline in upward mobility.
Like the American dream.
Yeah, that idea that your kids will be better off than you are. And they say that's much less certain now.
And housing is a big part of that.
Housing affordability is a huge factor in this stagnation.
Wow.
And then the book digs into the politics of this, this anti-growth sentiment.
Anti-growth.
And they trace this really interesting historical shift.
Okay.
They contrast the post-World War II era, where, you know, places like Lakewood, California welcomed growth to accommodate a growing population.
Makes sense.
With the rise of measures to restrict it.
Okay.
Like the Petaluma Plan, which capped the number of new housing units allowed.
Oh, wow.
And this shift towards limiting growth is everywhere now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the numbers are really striking.
Okay.
California, for example, used to issue over 200,000 housing permits annually in the 50s and 60s.
Okay.
Since 2007, they've never even hit 150,000 in a single year.
Wow. So that's a huge drop.
It's a massive change in how we think about building.
It really is.
And this anti-growth sentiment has a very direct and devastating consequence. Homelessness. And the book uses this really powerful analogy. They say it's like musical chairs.
Musical chair. Okay.
If there are more people than there are chairs,
right,
someone is going to be left standing when the music stops.
Okay, I see.
So in this case, the chairs are affordable homes.
Right.
And if we don't have enough, people will be left without a place to live.
That's a really good analogy.
And it's not just an unfortunate circumstance, right? They're very clear about this.
Okay.
It's a result of policy choices.
Oh.
Decisions that have constrained the housing supply.
Okay.
They also look at the unintended consequences of homeownership becoming the primary way people build wealth in the U.S.
Okay, so if your house is your main asset.
Yeah.
Okay.
You're going to want to protect its value.
Right.
And that can lead to policies that restrict new construction.
Oh, because more housing would mean lower prices.
Exactly.
Okay, I see.
And they talk about zoning laws.
Zoning laws, okay.
Which were originally intended to separate land uses.
Right, keep factories away from residential areas.
Yeah, things like that.
Okay.
But then, after trucks and buses made transportation easier, those zoning laws increasingly became tools to limit growth.
Oh, interesting.
And preserve the character of existing neighborhoods.
Okay.
Often at the expense of affordability.
So they're kind of used against their original purpose almost.
In a way, yes.
Okay.
And it's not just zoning.
What else?
They look at environmental regulations too.
Okay.
Like California's CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, which was designed for environmental protection, but is now often used to block development projects.
Really?
For a variety of reasons.
Okay.
Some of which don't have a lot to do with the environment.
Oh.
So it's kind of been co-opted in a way.
For other purposes, yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
And moving beyond the housing crisis.
Oh.
The book looks at this fascinating issue.
Okay.
The productivity puzzle.
What a productivity puzzle.
Particularly in construction.
Okay.
And it's kind of strange to learn that while productivity has surged in other industries.
Like manufacturing.
Yeah, like manufacturing.
Okay.
It's stagnated or even declined in construction since the 1970s.
Oh, that's really surprising.
It is. And the authors cite research that rules out a lack of investment as the cause.
So it's not just about not putting enough money in?
No.
Okay.
They even wonder if we're measuring construction output accurately.
Oh, interesting.
But even accounting for things like the size of houses built per worker,
Okay.
the productivity gains are tiny compared to other sectors.
So something else must be going on.
Exactly. And this leads them to this theory of sclerosis
The sclerosis.
in wealthy societies.
What is that?
The idea that as societies get older and richer,
Oh, right.
they develop more special interest groups and more veto points in their systems,
Veto points, okay.
which makes it harder to get things done.
So more people have the power to say no to things.
Essentially, yeah.
Okay.
And they specifically talk about the role of lawyers
Oh, Lors.
and what they call adversarial legalism in slowing things down.
Okay, so our legal system is designed to be fair.
Yeah, to make sure everyone is accountable.
Right.
But it can also become an obstacle
Okay.
with endless lawsuits and regulatory hurdles,
So it can be used to block things.
even things that might be beneficial,
Oh, wow.
like renewable energy or affordable housing.
Okay.
To define adversarial legalism a little more,
Okay.
it means relying heavily on lawsuits and courts
Okay.
to resolve disputes and enforce regulations.
Okay, so it becomes a very legalistic process.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And they use Ralph Nader's consumer protection movement as an example.
Ralph Nader, okay.
So his work led to really important environmental and safety laws. But it also created this system that's very prone to lawsuits,
Okay.
which can now be used to block projects, even good ones.
So even if a project might benefit society as a whole?
Yeah,
Okay.
it can get bogged down in legal challenges.
That's a really interesting point.
And this is connected to something they call the procedure fetish.
Procedure fetish, what's that?
This idea that in government,
Okay.
there's often this huge emphasis on process,
Okay.
on following every rule perfectly,
Right.
sometimes at the expense of achieving the actual goals.
So you're so focused on dotting your I's and crossing your T's
Yeah,
that you lose sight of the bigger picture.
exactly.
Okay.
And this can lead to bureaucratic delays
Okay.
and just a lack of effectiveness in government.
Right, so things just take forever and don't really work.
Precisely.
Okay.
And they use California's high-speed rail project as an example.
Oh, yeah, that's been going on for a long time.
Years of planning, billions of dollars.
Yep.
And the project is still mired in uncertainty
Wow.
with delays and cost overruns.
So those delays actually cost money too.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They emphasize that the longer it takes,
Yeah.
the more expensive it gets.
Wow, it's a vicious cycle.
It really is.
Okay.
And then the book shifts gears a bit
Mhm.
to talk about energy transition.
Energy transition. Okay.
So moving away from fossil fuels.
Right.
And they highlight the political obstacles to this.
Okay.
You know, we see protests all over the world over rising fuel prices
Yeah.
and resistance to certain green energy policies.
Right.
And this just underscores how crucial energy abundance is.
Okay.
They call it the nucleus of wealth.
Wow, the nucleus of wealth.
And they talk about how inequality is tied to energy scarcity
Okay.
and how clean and abundant energy could help us solve environmental problems
Okay.
through things like vertical greenhouses, desalination, carbon capture.
Yeah. So there's this huge potential there.
There is,
Oh.
yeah. But achieving that clean energy abundance is a huge undertaking.
What way?
They emphasize the scale of it.
Okay.
We'd need to build the equivalent of the entire U.S. electricity grid multiple times over by 2050,
Wow.
but using all renewables.
That's a massive amount of infrastructure.
It is, and that presents all sorts of challenges.
Like what?
Land use for solar and wind farms,
Right.
building new long-distance transmission lines.
Okay.
It's not a small task.
It sounds really complicated.
It is, and this leads to a discussion about innovation itself.
Okay.
And they challenge what they call the Eureka myth.
The Eureka Bill. Okay.
This romantic idea that progress is driven by sudden, brilliant inventions.
Right, like the light bulb moment.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
But they say the really important part is implementation.
Okay.
Actually taking those inventions and scaling them up.
So it's not enough to just have a good idea.
Right.
You have to be able to make it work in the real world.
Exactly. And they use the development of penicillin as an example.
Penicillin, right?
So it was this huge scientific breakthrough.
Right.
But initially it languished
Why?
because there was no effective way to mass produce it.
Oh, so it was a great idea, but nobody could use it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And they also challenged the idea that markets can do this scaling up on their own.
Well,
They say government has a crucial role to play.
Oh, interesting.
And they point to Operation Warp Speed.
The COVID vaccines.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
As a good example of government-led implementation.
Okay, so in a crisis, the government can really step up and make things happen.
Precisely.
Okay.
But they also talk about what they call the Kariko problem.
The Kariko problem? Who's Kariko?
So Katalin Kariko was this scientist
Okay.
who did decades of research on mRNA,
Oh, wow.
which was really important for the COVID vaccine.
Okay.
But her work was largely ignored for a long time.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and this is what they call the Kariko problem. So sometimes really important research gets overlooked.
Exactly.
No.
And they also critique some aspects of the NIH funding system.
The National Institutes of Health.
Yeah, saying it can be too risk-averse,
Okay.
Favoring incremental research over potentially groundbreaking but risky stuff.
So playing it safe.
Yes. And they also point to the emphasis on grantsmanship,
What's that?
being really good at writing grant proposals,
Okay.
which might sometimes overshadow the actual scientific merit of the research.
So you could have a really good idea,
Yeah.
but if you're not good at writing about it.
You might not get the funding.
Right.
And they contrast this with DARPA,
Okay.
the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency,
Sorry.
which gives program managers more flexibility
Okay.
and encourages risky research
Okay.
and collaboration across different fields.
So very different approach.
Yeah, and they argue that we need a better science of science.
A science of science. Okay.
Right? To figure out how to nurture innovation more effectively.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay.
And finally, the book looks at what they call a politics of abundance.
A politics of abundance. Interesting.
So they discuss these political orders,
Okay.
which are like dominant sets of beliefs about how to govern.
Okay.
And they say there's potential for a new one to emerge,
Okay.
focused on achieving abundance,
Okay.
moving beyond these neoliberal ideas that have been around for a while.
Okay.
And they contrast the scarcity-focused narratives of right-wing populism
Okay.
with the potential for progressives to embrace an abundance-driven agenda.
So instead of fighting over a limited pie,
Yeah.
we can focus on baking more pies.
Exactly.
Okay.
And they point to the rise of the YMBY movement.
YMBY.
Yes, in my backyard,
Oh, okay.
as a sign of this shift.
Towards being more open to development.
Exactly.
Right.
And they note the growing bipartisan support for building more in the U.S. Yeah, driven in part by competition with China.
Okay. So there's this sense that we need to be building more.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But they also acknowledge that it's not easy to rapidly deploy these projects,
Right.
even when there's political will and the money.
So there are still obstacles to overcome.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And they frame this pursuit of abundance as kind of going back to the roots of leftist thought,
Okay.
which emphasize production and material progress.
So making sure people have what they need.
Exactly.
Okay.
And they stress the need for tailored solutions for different industries,
Okay.
because different industries face different bottlenecks.
Right. So there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Precisely.
Okay.
And this is where bottleneck detection comes in.
Bottleneck detection.
Really understanding how industries work
Okay.
to identify what's holding them back.
Okay. So it's like finding the weakest link in the chain.
Yeah,
Love that.
exactly.
Okay.
And they give an example, the artificial scarcity of primary care physicians.
Oh, interesting.
So we don't have enough primary care doctors.
Right.
And that's a bottleneck in the healthcare system.
Okay. I see.
And they discuss different policy tools for fostering abundance, like push funding through government grants and loans.
Okay.
And pull funding, things like prizes and advanced market commitments,
Okay.
which they say have been successful in things like vaccine development.
Okay.
And they come back to energy abundance again
Okay.
as a crucial bottleneck to address.
Because it affects so many other things.
Exactly. It would make things more affordable
Yeah.
and could drive innovation in other areas like AI and desalination.
So it's really foundational.
It is.
Okay.
And they close with this vision for a liberalism that builds,
Liberalism that builds. Okay.
focused on actually making progress in housing, energy, healthcare, infrastructure.
So it's about delivering tangible results.
Exactly.
Okay.
And they see this as tapping into this American tradition of thinking big
Right.
and embracing progress through technology and institutions.
Okay. So it's about using our strengths
Yeah,
to create a better future.
exactly.
Wow.
So abundance really presents this thought-provoking and optimistic vision of a future where we can overcome these challenges by focusing on building, innovating, and removing the barriers to progress.
It's a really inspiring message.
It is.
So this has just been a quick overview of some of the key arguments and insights from Abundance.
Yeah, we definitely encourage you to pick up a copy and really dive into it.
There's so much more to explore.
Absolutely.
What really resonated with you from this discussion, Paul?
I think for me it was how interconnected all these challenges are.
Yeah, like how housing affects innovation.
Exactly, and how energy scarcity limits our options for dealing with climate change.
Right.
And how even our institutions, while well-intentioned, can sometimes be the biggest obstacles to progress.
That's a really important point.
It makes you think about whether the systems we have are still working for us.
Right. Are they actually helping us achieve our goals?
Yeah.
That's a big question.
It is.
And it leaves you with this feeling of possibility, right?
Absolutely.
That a better future isn't just about wishing for it, but about creating it.
Yeah. Taking action.
Building something new.
Exactly.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into Abundance on Bookkast,
where we bring you the bestsellers in minutes.
We'll see you next time for another insightful exploration.